Hello, everyone, and welcome to 5 Facts. My name is Tony Southcott, and today's movie is Suspiria. Suspiria is a 1977 horror movie from Dario Argento that takes place during the Italian Giallo period. Giallo is referring to a post-fascist type of paperback that always had yellow covers. They generally were a little bit pulpy. They dealt with a lot of issues like madness, isolation, suspicion, murder, that sort of thing. This movie is absolutely incredible. It's ahead of its time, both in soundtrack and in film design. Dario Argento did a fantastic job making the colors just pop on this. Nowadays, directors can just put filters on, make things look right, but back then it was a much larger effort to put this many vivid reds and greens, and basically the way he used light created an entirely different type of film. It would go on to inspire a lot of directors, most notably David Lynch. If you look at some of his work, especially Mulholland Drive, you can see a lot of influences. It's the story of a young woman going to Germany to become part of a renowned dancing academy. The night that she arrives, the academy has two of its students murdered brutally. This leads down a long, terrible path of suspicion, paranoia, dreamlike states, drugging, all sorts of terrible things that also lead to witches and unbelievable horrors. I'm going to keep the synopsis a little bit more brief this week. Let's get to the facts. As always, there will be spoilers ahead. If you haven't seen this one, go check it out. It's awesome. It's a little harder to find, but you can actually find the full movie on YouTube if you search hard enough. Fact number 1. Very little sound was recorded on the set of Suspiria. In what would become a common trait for Italian cinema during the 70s, almost all of the lines were actually redubbed after filming. There are many reasons for this. A lot of it comes down to the fact that most of these actors didn't speak each other's languages, so they would speak their lines in their normal French, English, German. Later, when redubbing happened, they would just make a French version, a German version, an English version, an Italian version, all of that. A lot of the actresses actually had trouble with this because it's a little bit harder to know when your line starts whenever you don't understand what the other person is talking about. This is actually cited as one of the more negative things about Suspiria. One of the only negatives that I could really come up with is that sometimes it is a little bit jarring to see somebody speaking in English getting dubbed in English. It also led to some weird moments on the set where people are trying to do very serious acting for dramatic scenes, and there's a set being built less than 50 yards away. You could just hear hammers, you could hear all sorts of construction noises while you're trying to act. This also allowed for some interesting tactics on how they were able to get lines to people. Udo Kier is barely in this movie, and he didn't have time to work on his lines, so they actually had someone lay down behind the bench and read his lines to him so that he could repeat them right after. It also allowed for some interesting tactics from Dario Argento, who would blast the theme at full volume on many subwoofers just to make sure that it gave the actresses a sense of unease whenever they were running, being pursued. Fact number 2, the soundtrack is widely celebrated, sampled, and copied. The theme song for Suspiria was done by an Italian prog rock band called Goblin. It sounds way ahead of its time. You'll probably hear it in the background of what I'm talking about right now, and I can't stop talking to let you fully listen to it because copyright stuff. The song is haunting, modern, and really fits this movie well. Some people have complained that they overused it because it pops up around 6 to 8 different times, but I thought that it just really added to the mood of the film. If you listen closely, there's a bunch of words being said. After a while, people asked the band what it meant, and they admitted that it was mostly just gibberish. To date, the song has been sampled and used by many, many bands, starting with Ministry in their song Psalm 69. It was also sampled by many hip-hop artists, starting with the Wu-Tang Clan, moving on to Cage, RJD2, and Atmosphere. The cartoon series Invader Zim even got in on that action. In less legal news, a lot of kung fu films from China actually ended up stealing this song and never paid for the rights for it. Fact number 3. Some of the effects were a little too intense for the actors. In one scene of the movie, Stefania Cassini has to dive into a room filled with barbed wire. Of course, this isn't real barbed wire, it's just a bunch of spools of wire spread out over the ground, but the more she tried to get through, the more she found herself actually stuck, having her skin torn, having the wire grip tighter and tighter and tighter, making it hard to breathe, pinching her skin, and basically incapacitating her. During the grand finale, Jessica Harper was running through the halls of this set. While explosions were going off, things were catching on fire, and the walls were literally cracking like stress fractures. Some of these were going off way too close to her, and she said she was absolutely terrified that she was going to get blown up in the pyrotechnics. While some of the shots were also gross, they featured several maggots, they were actually able to keep this a little easier on the girls by dropping rice from the ceiling during a lot of the scenes. Fact number 4, it was one of the last films made with Technicolor processing. Though the film was shot on standard Eastman Kodak color film, it was actually processed using an old method of tricolor emulation. Argento tracked down one of the last remaining tricolor machines out there just so he could get better colors out of this film. The reason he really did this was he liked the way that, say, movies like Gone with the Wind and everything had very potent reds and greens. Since so much of the movie relied on having those colors create this sort of dream nightmarescape, this surreal atmosphere where you don't know fully what's real and what isn't, like he went that extra mile just to make sure that it looked perfect. Fact number 5, the movie was supposed to be based on 12-year-old girls. Originally, Dario Argento wanted this movie to be filmed with 12-year-old girls. His father and the producer of this movie decided that that wasn't going to work because hurting children on the set of a movie was definitely taboo at the time. It's still hard to get away with today sometimes. Argento didn't change the script after this, which is why a lot of the lines end up feeling a little bit childish and a little bit more naive than they should. He also had the doors built with the handles up higher almost at face level in some scenes so that the girls would be reaching up for the door and making them look more slight, more childish. One other bit on casting, just because it's not quite long enough to be its own fact. The woman who played Helena Marcos, the witch in this movie, was actually a 90-year-old prostitute that Argento picked up from the streets of Rome. No one knows exactly how Dario Argento found her, but it does make for an interesting story on the set. Suspiria is a very fascinating look at horror. It takes the psychological genre to the next level and then throws the gore on top of it. You're looking at a movie that's composition is completely just, it's beautiful. The composition is on a level that you usually don't see in horror movies, especially not from the 70s. You saw a little bit of that in the last 5 Facts with Rosemary's Baby because Roman Polanski took the time to do it well. But so often the movies from this era just couldn't quite reach this level. It's so gorgeous that it actually lifts up a kind of muddy story that needed a little bit more put into it to be fully coherent, but it still allows for an interesting mystery that you can watch again and again. It's a film that subtly drips anger from every shot, just the brutal reds, the way the headmistresses talk to the students, the way they're actually inciting this sort of hateful thing to overtake the town that they're in. It's not just happening to the girls at the academy, it's more like a blight on an entire city or region of Germany. It's part of the reason why, in one of the more violent scenes of the movie, they can turn a seeing eye dog into a vicious killer that kills its own owner. It's a story about innocents trying to survive inside of all this torment and hate, and the cost that it brings on these girls. It's almost like a hallucinatory experience. Whenever you see the main character get drugged over and over again and what they're planning to do with her, how they're taking care of these girls, it just gives you this sense of unease that just permeates the entire movie. It's also a great example of what I was talking about earlier with giallo horror. We've covered one other one on the podcast. I'm going to put the link below. It's an extraordinarily long titled one that I believe goes something like, "Your vice is a locked door, and only I have the key," which is actually kind of a theme in giallo as well, to have these really Baroque titles. While we're on the subject of the podcast, if you enjoyed this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Maybe check out the Human Echoes podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Google Store, pretty much any podcast platform. You will be able to find the Human Echoes podcast. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for giving the awesome feedback I have been getting on these. Really means a lot to me. If you have anything to say about Suspiria, tell us about your own experiences with it. Be sure to hit up the comments. See you guys in 2 weeks.